You're watching Sky News, Gareth Barlow with you. I just want to remind you of some breaking developments that have happened in the last 10 to 15 minutes or so. These are Just Stop Oil protesters. We can show you this footage now. And you can see these two women. They're about to remove a hammer and chisel there. And you can see and hear the strikes of that hammer against the chisel head.
Okay, so I guess I need to do some explaining, and maybe some apologising. As the nice news presenter's just been saying, these two ladies over here, Sue and Judy, are Just Stop Oil protesters, who are attempting to smash the glass surrounding Magna Carta, one of the most important documents in the history of Western democracy. And this gormless blob floating into shot, well, yeah, that's me. Sorry for spoiling the view. This moment of symbolic criminal damage was the adrenaline-filled high point of a tense 24 hours I spent in the company of the UK's most controversial climate protesters. My goal? To try and understand what drives campaigners to engage in this kind of action, what it takes to pull off such a stunt, and whether or not attacking old documents is really likely to bring about a change in the government's climate policy. Answering those questions has involved entering a world of encrypted messaging, code names, secret cameras, and endless arrests. It's involved speaking with a range of folks with various relationships to and thoughts about Just Stop Oil's activism, and it's required delving into some of the growing body of academic research surrounding why some political movements succeed in achieving their aims, whilst others fail. One caveat to all of this. Whilst this video is going to involve some debate surrounding the political tactics of Just Stop Oil, one thing is not up for question. According to the United Nations Environment Programme, the planet we live on is presently on track to hit a devastating 2.9 degrees Celsius of global warming this century. Such a world would be one of extreme, widespread and regular heat waves, one in which much of the Maldives, the Seychelles, Amsterdam and New Orleans have disappeared under rising seas, and in which hundreds of millions of people would be displaced from their homes. If we want to avoid such a calamitous scenario, the question is not if we stop using oil and other fossil fuels, but when we do so. And our speed or hesitancy here will have a direct link to how many lives we're able to save. As things stand, neither governments nor oil companies seem to be acting with all that much haste. So, can a ragtag bunch of British activists convince them to do so? Let's find out, I guess.
I am getting nervous now, and I'm just going along to kind of be there. So I feel like if I'm nervous, they must be very nervous. I'm just happen to be there. I just happen to be there to see the treasures of the British Library, right?
You're currently watching footage of me pacing around a hotel room in central London, absolutely bricking it. And the reason I'm so nervous is because the night before, I'd been given advanced knowledge of a, let's say, provocative event.
Well, the plan for tomorrow is to go to the British Library and to do something disruptive which will attract attention. I've just seen these. They look very new. It looks like they've never been used before. This is going to, I think, make quite an impression.
See, a few months previously, I got in touch with the folks at climate activist group Just Stop Oil, asking if they'd be up for participating in an interview for a video about disruptive climate protest. They offered me one better. The chance to follow along as a pair of activists tried to smash the glass casing surrounding Magna Carta, which seemed like it would be a pretty fun and interesting experience. Until the morning of.
I am a bit worried about getting arrested just as like accidentally as an accessory. If I go into a normal library, I'm quiet. You know, like I keep to the rules. So this does feel like this is the last thing we wanted to happen. This is mad. really mad. Here we go.
So I left the hotel room behind and headed towards the British Library. The area surrounding the library is filled with offices, university buildings, and a massive train station, and I felt weirdly conspicuous as I wove my way through the crowds of students and commuters and tourists. I don't want to harp on too much about how nervous I was, but I was nervous. The first thing I was worried about was timing. I'd been told that the action would be taking place around 10:30 a.m., but it seemed a fair assumption that circumstances could develop quickly and the timings could shift. The second thing I was worried about was that, amid all the commotion, I might end up accidentally getting arrested. 2 years previously, the Met Police had wrongfully arrested a press photographer who'd been taking photos of a JSO road blocking. Despite knowing I wasn't breaking any laws and having my press card ready to go in my pocket then, I was giving a lot of thought to how cautious I should be in trying to film the stunt. The last thing I wanted was to be mistaken for actually being involved and having to try and talk my way out of things. As you'll know from the intro, that fear would later fade, and it would almost cause some problems.
Would you mind deleting it if you don't mind?
I won't do that, I'm afraid.
Why is that?
Nevertheless, it was a blazing hot day, and the sun at least put me in a good mood as I walked through the gates of the library piazza. I even stopped to get some footage of the banners and cafe outside. Then, after a deep breath, I decided to head in. But before we get to the action itself, who exactly are Sue, Judy, and Just Stop Oil, and what is it precisely that they want? Sue and Judy's attempt to smash the casing which surrounds Magna Carta was, at time of recording, the latest in a long line of interventions carried out by Just Stop Oil. If you follow the news in Britain at all, you've likely heard a lot about JSO already. If you're watching from elsewhere in the world, you'll at the very least recognise the distinctive shade of orange which has become their calling card. Since their founding in 2019, that shade of orange has been splashed across government buildings, police headquarters, universities, snooker tables, artworks, monuments, rugby matches and flower shows. On t-shirts and banners, the same shade of orange has accompanied the interruption of concerts, TV recordings, university graduations and theatre performances, as well as countless blockings of roads and motorways. These actions have been endlessly controversial. Politicians from both major parties here in the UK have condemned the group, the right-wing press have repeatedly tried to turn them into a national bogeyman, and a bunch of American teenagers on TikTok briefly became convinced that the whole thing was some kind of big oil-funded psyop intended to make climate activists look bad.
And we'll get to some of the criticisms of JSO's approach shortly. But it's helpful to first take a look at where the group came from and what its stated goals are.
I chatted to JSO spokesperson James Skeet to get an overview of what the group's about.
My name's James Skeet. I'm a spokesperson for Just Stop Oil. I've been involved with the campaign since probably roughly its inception. Just Stop Oil is a direct action campaign taking action around the issue of oil and gas, originally oil and gas licenses in the UK, and now we've moved to a demand for our governments to work together to sign an international legally binding treaty to end the extraction and burning of oil, gas and coal by 2030.
So the story of Just Stop Oil begins in March 2022, when a couple of student activists used that soon-to-be iconic shade of orange to graffiti slogans on the walls of 3 London universities. Their protest was intended to draw attention to those universities' continued practice of investing money in fossil fuel companies. This, the activists suggested, pointed to a clear hypocrisy between the scientific research undertaken by those universities and its corporate actions. While these activists were the first to carry out an action in Just Stop Oil's name, the group itself had been founded a month or two earlier by these two, Roger Hallam and Indigo Rumbelow. Hallam and Rumbelow had been key figures in a pre-existing group called Extinction Rebellion, which over the previous couple of years had been highly successful in reinvigorating climate change activism in the UK and across the globe. Extinction Rebellion, or XR to its friends, contained many of the strategic seeds which would go on to define Just Stop Oil. It used sophisticated, thoughtful graphic design to create a consistent brand identity. It built itself around clear, easy-to-understand demands. Finally, XR engaged in self-consciously disruptive action. During its first year, the group repeatedly blocked roads and occupied portions of central London. In fact, XR activists had set out with the explicit intention of getting themselves arrested, in order to attempt to overwhelm the police system.
In many ways, Extinction Rebellion was a massive success. Just days after the group took over key strategic sites in London, the UK Parliament officially declared a climate emergency. With this success, however, came new challenges.
A massive influx of new activists naturally led to increased disagreements over the tactics the group was using. Some, including Roger Hallam, had wanted to take their disruptive tactics further. Specifically, Hallam had drawn up plans to fly drones within the airspace of London's Heathrow Airport, in the hopes that safety concerns would cause flights to be temporarily suspended. Others felt that such an act would be counterproductive, turning ordinary folks away from climate action just at the point when the movement seemed to be gaining mainstream acceptance. Hallam's less uncompromising comrades won out, and Extinction Rebellion began to embrace more measured tactics. In 2023, they gave up these disruptive tactics altogether. Hallam, however, remained committed to more radical action. During 2019, he trialled several splinter groups which tried to recapture the radical ethos of early XR. The first group, Heathrow Pause, attempted to go ahead with Hallam's drone plan, but were quickly arrested by the Metropolitan Police. His next group, which he co-founded with Indigo Rumbelow, called Insulate Britain, undertook a campaign of road blockings in an attempt to persuade the UK government to fund better insulation for British homes. Nevertheless, it was Hallam and Rumbelow's second collaboration, Just Stop Oil, which would turn out to have the greatest sticking power. The success of Just Stop Oil, at least in attracting consistent press attention, came partly from its ingenious branding. Extinction Rebellion's visual identity had been pretty cool, but Just Stop Oil's was so incredibly simple. An eye-catching logo, a clear typeface, and that instantly recognizable shade of orange. Where XR had clung to 3 core demands, Just Stop Oil stuck to just one: that the UK government immediately halt all future licensing and consents for the exploration, development and production of fossil fuels in the UK. That demand didn't even need to be Googled or looked up, it was right there in the name.
Perhaps as important was JSO's embracing of a slightly broader range of tactics than either XR or Insulate Britain had. In addition to road blockings and attacking fuel stations, Just Stop Oil began undertaking what it calls cultural actions. These involve activists throwing paint, powder, or most famously soup, over various famous landmarks, cultural works, and sporting events.
We'll talk about how these actions are supposed to bring about change shortly, but first, let's return to the British Library to see how Sue and Judy are getting on. So I enter the library and ascend the stairs into the main atrium. For anyone who's never had the chance to visit, it's worth saying that the British Library is made up of 3 distinct areas. The front of house area has a souvenir shop, a cafe, and dozens of desks where people are free to come and work. They're really popular with students and other literary types, presumably hoping to channel the creative energies of all the writers whose books the library holds. Further in, there are a number of reading rooms. As the British Library is the UK's main repository library, books can't be taken off-site. Instead, anyone wishing to make use of the books in the library's collection has to request the item that they're interested in, and the requested book or document is then sent to one of these reading rooms, where the person who wants to use it can peruse it and take notes before handing it back. Finally, there are a handful of galleries. Some of these hold rotating exhibitions on various cultural topics, such as the one that you can see advertised here, but there's also a permanent exhibition called the Treasures of the British Library. This is essentially the library's museum exhibit. It's filled with a host of book-adjacent historical items related to the history of the written word. There's a Shakespeare First Folio, several important religious texts, and pride of place in a special side room, Magna Carta. It was in the Treasures of the British Library exhibit that Sue and Judy's big protest was due to happen. I'd arrived early, so after a brief glance at the impressive stacks of old books in the atrium, I headed into the exhibit. It had been a fair while since I'd had the opportunity to visit the British Library, so I tried to take the time to look around. Partly on account of being a massive nerd who likes learning about old books, and partly in a further attempt to calm my nerves. I was particularly drawn to one shelf which had a note revealing that one item had been temporarily removed. If Sue and Judy had their way, presumably a similar sign would be accompanying Magna Carta soon. Earlier than I had originally expected, however, I found myself pulled into the Magna Carta room. The night before, I'd sat down with Sue and Judy for an interview, and they told me of the political significance of the document and how that had drawn them to using it as the focus of their stunt. The exhibit itself only further stressed this significance. One sign touted it as a global symbol of freedom and rights. A series of tablets on one of the walls displayed interviews with various experts on the document. One of these featured Conservative politician William Hague talking about how the document had previously been used by radicals, reformers, and revolutionaries in previous centuries. Others spoke to its continued relevance today. It did kind of feel like there was a sense of foreshadowing to all of this. Nevertheless, it did give a sense that this protest was part of a long history of activists using the document as a reference point in demanding political change. By the time I'd taken in the whole exhibition, 10:30 had long since passed, and there was still no sign of Sue and Judy. To pass the time, I went back out into the main exhibition and took another look at some of the other exhibits. Fittingly, the wall facing the entrance to the Magna Carta room held a display of old paintings of animals that are now either extinct or at risk of becoming so. By this point, I was getting really fractious. The slip in the schedule had only further given me opportunity to ponder over the potential fallout of the protest and the commotion that was about to be caused. Then, I saw them. Sat by the entrance to the treasures of the British Library room, Sue and Judy were waiting. Cool as cucumbers. Things were about to kick off. But even with these historical precedents for using Magna Carta to make a political point, what exactly was the goal here? On first glance, damaging an old document, or even chucking some powder over Stonehenge, might seem like a slightly odd way to try and bring about government action on the climate crisis. Whether one agrees with it or not, however, Just Stop Oil do at least have a logical explanation for how they think this might provoke change.
The point about the Magna Carta is, of course, it's about ancient freedoms and, going against oppression and taking away the power of the rich and powerful.
See, the core principle established by Magna Carta was that the King of England had to abide by the law of the land in the same way that everybody else does. These days, that same principle applies to the British government. The ruling party might change the law by passing legislation in Parliament, but it can't simply make things up as it goes along.
This has had significant consequences for progress on climate action.
See, the UK's Climate Change Act currently commits the government to reducing the nation's carbon emissions by 2/3 by the year 2030. It sets that out not as a vague ambition, but as a legal obligation. And every 5 years, the government has to publish a so-called Carbon Budget Delivery Plan, which sets out exactly how it intends to hit that target. The most recent plan, however, was pretty questionable. It relied heavily on unproven technologies such as carbon capture, a process through which carbon is essentially sucked back out of the air after it's been emitted. In response, 2 environmental charities took the government to court, and less than a fortnight prior to Sue and Judy's trip to the British Library, the UK's High Court found the plan to be unlawful. Sue and Judy were therefore partly attempting to draw attention to this ruling. At the same time, Magna Carta's establishment of the right to a fair trial allowed them to use the action to protest what they would likely argue are excessive legal crackdowns on climate activists.
We'll come back to that crackdown shortly. It's worth saying, however, that not all of what Just Stop Oil describe as cultural actions are designed to have such specific connotations.
Chucking soup on Van Gogh's sunflowers, disrupting a performance of Les Miserables, these stunts do attempt to make broad points about how there will be, as the slogan goes, no art on a dead planet.
And compared with Magna Carta, however wonderful it is as a piece of our history and to be protected, it is of no comparative value compared with the extinction of the human race, for instance.
But they're primarily designed to ensure the climate crisis remains in the news as much as possible. Political activists like to talk about theories of change. This refers to a given person or group's hypothesis for which strategies are likely to bring about the political changes they desire. It's kind of like a recipe. If we do X, then Y will happen. Just Stop Oil's theory of change begins from a belief that attempting to bring about action on the climate crisis through electoral politics, petitions, and protest marches has already failed. JSO activist Hanan Amur, who we'll hear more from shortly, put it this way.
It's been like decades of people signing petitions and sad pictures of polar bears on on an ice cube or something. We've been seeing that for decades now, so I think that's why civil resistance has come into play here. Now the street movement is happening.
Their feeling is that the mass demonstrations climate activists have relied on in the past simply don't get the attention of those in power. According to the Mayor of London, the UK capital plays host to more than 2,000 protests per year, and most of those don't get anywhere near a politician or a single mention in the news.
Like Extinction Rebellion and Insulate Britain before it then, Just Stop Oil takes influence from more radical predecessors.
The suffragettes who won women the right to vote, the freedom riders who challenged segregation on public transport in the US, these groups didn't bring about change through asking nicely, but through sustained campaigns of highly disruptive direct action. JSO co-founder Roger Hallam formulated the theory of change which guides the group's actions whilst undertaking a PhD at King's College London. And his research led him to believe that successful protest movements need to undertake actions which fit 4 key criteria.
Firstly, actions have to be disruptive. Preferably, they should break the law.
According to Hallam, law-breaking and the arrests which follow show those in power that a movement is serious and committed enough to suffer for its beliefs. Arrests also create what Hallam calls social tension. They force non-activists in politics, the media, and everyday life to engage with the issue at hand in a much deeper way than they otherwise might.
Secondly, actions have to be high profile. They need to be concentrated in places where both politicians and the media will notice.
This has led JSO to concentrate most of its roadblocking and trespassing actions in London, where they're most likely to be noticed by the rich and powerful. But it also served as the genesis for the cultural actions such as Sue and Judy's Magna Carta stunt. For better or worse, actions involving sports events and cultural artifacts tend to generate infinitely more media debate than a protest at an oil refinery ever would.
Thirdly, all actions have to be non-violent, and remain that way.
JSO are evidently willing to engage in property damage and trespass, but they view violence to be completely beyond the pale. Their commitment to this is deep. They know they're about to be, at best, shouted at a lot, and at worst, physically assaulted. They thus go to great lengths to calm themselves, to the point they can override the very powerful natural instinct in such scenarios to respond.
Finally, successful activism has to be sustained. Day after day, Hallam's quite fond of saying.
JSO will often bunch their actions up into a couple of seasons of relentless action per year. These usually begin with cultural actions like the Magna Carta stunt, which serve to gain media attention before the group continues with slightly more extreme interventions. The group's throwing of powder on Stonehenge, for example, was quickly followed by an attempt to graffiti Taylor Swift's ruinously polluting private jet.
The ultimate goal is to become such a headache for the government, such a massive pain in the arse, that it simply becomes easier for politicians to act on the climate crisis than it is to continue to process all the arrests and court cases and controversy that activists are causing.
There are plenty of critics of this approach, folks who believe it's more likely to turn people against the climate movement than bolster it. And we'll talk to one of those shortly. But before we come on to that, let's see how those principles are embodied in our 2 activists of the day, Sue and Judy. By this point, I'd studied every single artifact in the entire treasures of the British Library room in intricate detail. Shakespeare's First Folio? Seen it. The library's collection of sacred texts? done that too. I'd even learned a lot about the literary career of Liberal politician Shirley Williams. It would later turn out that Sue and Judy had been waiting for a third activist to turn up who was due to film the event for Just Stop Oil themselves. The activist whose shot I would quickly ruin. Sorry again. I hadn't really thought about it before, but part of Just Stop Oil's commitment to ensuring their actions are high profile requires them to have a pretty sophisticated media operation. Rather than simply hoping that someone else records a stunt then, they generally have someone on hand to film what's taken place, providing them with footage to both post on their social media accounts and pass on to news organisations to include in their reports. While I was pondering all of this, I felt a tap on my shoulder and realised that Judy had come up to quietly say hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm okay.
You having a good day?
Yeah.
Nice to learn about. I've just been reading about the sort of Magna Carta and its influence over the years. There's some nice little videos in there about how it's been used by kind of radicals and revolutionaries through over the ages.
I must have a good look.
Yeah.
Go and have a look.
I was once again shocked by how calm and collected she seemed, despite knowing that she was about to get arrested. The fact she'd taken the time to wish me good morning also further complicated the media framing of Just Stop Oil as these horrible, mindless radicals. Again, there's a lot which can be disputed about the actions they undertake, but my personal experience of every activist I'd spoken to over the past 24 hours had been one of kindness, thoughtfulness, and welcome. With the sense that things might be about to get going, I found myself a spot where I could be ready to follow Sue and Judy into the Magna Carta room the moment they leapt into action. And before long, they did. As Sue and Judy ambled through the exhibition, I set my iPhone recording and followed along. Now, you might assume that one of the foundational documents of the British Constitution might have a security guard stationed permanently by its side. But it doesn't. There is a camera on the ceiling, but the fact Magna Carta is situated in a side room away from the rest of the exhibits means that unless a member of staff happens to wander into that room on their rounds, it's kind of tucked away from view. This gave Sue and Judy ample time to make their preparations. They put down their bags, took a moment to gather their emotions, and then Judy took off her jacket to reveal her Just Stop Oil t-shirt. Then, as Sue held the chisel in place, Judy began to hammer. But what's it like to perform an action like this? We hear a fair bit from media commentators on the impacts of Just Stop Oil's stunts, but what emotions are running through activists' heads as they pull off one of these audacious actions? Even being present in the room, knowing that Sue and Judy were about to pull off their demonstration, I was absolutely pranging out. Never has a man sweated so much whilst watching a video of William Hague.
Sue and Judy, on the other hand, were looking endlessly calm. Judy had even come up and said good morning.
It was hard to imagine that they were about to not only start causing commotion in a crowded room, but perform an act of criminal damage for which they knew they would be arrested and then carted off to a police station.
In order to get a better sense of what it's like to perform a stunt like this, I met up with Hanan Amur, a JSO supporter who's taken part in a couple of actions with the group to date.
My name is Hanan Amur, and outside of this I am a student. I'm currently studying robotics at London Met, so I want to be an engineer one day, software and hardware. I've taken 2 cultural actions. I disrupted Les Mis, found guilty quite recently actually for that. I also broke the glass of the Rokeby Venus painting, so in the National Gallery, so I'm not allowed back there.
Her experience was that undertaking an action like this is an absolute whirlwind of different emotions.
The experience of taking a Just Stop Oil action is like none other, it's like you feel like everyone knows what you're doing when on the way there. You're like, oh my god, everyone knows, the security knows, the police know already. But at the same time, you're very calm because it's just what needs to be done. You're in civil resistance now.
The night before, Judy had confessed to feeling similarly anxious.
I'm feeling nervous, yes. it's not something I spend my time doing, smashing up national treasures, let's say that. No, I wouldn't. I'm a terribly conventional person. I went to a convent school, I taught in a convent school.
Nevertheless, Panan did suggest that there is something empowering about having the sense that someone is doing something to resist government complacency on the climate crisis.
It's like you are non-compliant with anything, with your arrest, like all the way up from, getting there, all the way up to the arrest. It's like non-compliancy. I know some people that have had to be carried from their arrest into the police van, out of the police van, into the police station. And I think that attitude is the essence of taking these actions, which is just non-compliance with a government that literally does not care.
I can't see inside their heads, but perhaps it was that same sense of empowerment and of taking action against inaction which powered on Sue and Judy as they began to crack Magna Carta's protective casing. I counted 13 whacks of the hammer before a security guard came over to intervene. Perhaps there's someone keeping an eye on the security cameras who had instructed them to head over, or perhaps a member of the public had told them what was going on. Maybe the almighty racket the chisel was making was enough. Either way, I'd assumed that every even vaguely prominent landmark in London would have a dedicated Just Stop Oil response plan by this point. A kind of code orange, if you will. The group's actions have been so widespread that they've got to at least know it's a possibility they might turn up one day. That didn't seem to be the case. Instead, the initial reaction was largely one of confusion. In typically British fashion, the security guard first simply asked them what they were doing. But before long, it became pretty evident who they were and why they were here. As he attempted to gain some control over the situation and call for some backup, Sue and Judy moved on to giving a brief statement explaining why they'd done what they'd done.
As a Christian, I am compelled to do all that I can
Can you stop doing that, please? Stop filming, please, eh?
to
Can you stop doing that?
alleviate
Stop doing
the
that, please?
appalling suffering that's
comes
coming
from Magna
down
Carta,
the line
please.
and is here already. So we must
Stop doing that, please. Did you hear me?
just stop.
Yes, sister, can you come to Magna Carta over?
As a handful of bemused library visitors looked on, the pair calmly unfolded a pair of stools they'd brought with them, sat down, and began supergluing themselves to the exhibit. This is fairly standard practice for JSO stunts. It ensures activists can remain in place and forces whatever internal security team is working in a particular location to have to call the police to safely remove them. Given this meant they were unable to do much about Sue and Judy, the security team switched their focus to trying to clear the Magna Carta room of guests, and I was only too happy to oblige. Back in the main room, it was fascinating to observe the extent to which this big stunt both had and hadn't affected everyone's inbuilt understanding of how to behave in a library. On the one hand, a large proportion of folks present had gathered round to try and get a good look of what was going on. On the other, everyone remained firmly in hushed-voiced library mode. Watching the security team try to block people's view of the activists, presumably in the hope that folks would move on, it was hard not to feel a deep sense of sympathy for the team. It was already the kind of boiling hot day which seems to break the souls of most Brits, and this had just turned into the shift from hell. All of which points to one of the major criticisms of Just Stop Oil's tactics. There's obviously been some predictable pearl clutching from right-wing voices such as the presenters at GB News, who have regularly invited activists onto their shows to spar with. Others, who may or may not have much of a view on the climate crisis at all, have criticised the extent to which JSO's actions impact the lives of ordinary people. Blocking roads in London or covering artworks might have the intention of pissing off the government, but its immediate effect is on normal people going about their everyday lives.
It might be easy for some who are more sympathetic to JSO's aims to simply push these criticisms to one side. The disruption caused by the climate crisis will be far, far greater than that caused by having to sit in traffic for an hour waiting for the police to drag some activists off, after all. Nevertheless, it's a criticism that's worth taking seriously.
Even on the low-stakes end, Sue and Judy's stunt at the British Library caused the Magna Carta room to be closed off for a time. There was a tour group who were about to go in and see the document who were denied that opportunity. In the case of road blockings or attempt to shut down airports even, there will be people who miss holidays and family events or have their work disrupted. This can have real human and financial consequences for those affected.
By extension, some have argued that Just Stop Oil's approach has the potential to turn people against the climate movement and potentially make them feel negatively about climate action altogether. One such voice is academic and director of the Climate Majority Project, Rupert Reed.
Yes, I'm Rupert Reed. I direct a thing called the Climate Majority Project. We'll be talking about that more. Basically, we're trying to mainstream climate action. I was until recently a prof at the University of East Anglia, working alongside some of the world's leading climate scientists. But I've now taken early retirement so I can really focus on trying to make sure the world doesn't go to hell in a handcart.
In this video, we've been speaking to a bunch of people from Just Stop Oil, and we're going to come on to kind of some kind of maybe disagreements that you have in terms of tactics with them. But I wanted to give you the opportunity to just clarify that you are very much someone who 100% and wholly believes that we need to be doing a lot more to tackle the climate crisis.
Well, Tom, I'd go further than that. I would say that what you've just said is a gross understatement. Most people don't appreciate just how much trouble we're in.
Rupert was previously a member of Extinction Rebellion and has taken part in disruptive actions in the past.
In 2018, when we launched Extinction Rebellion, we had the view, which I think was entirely correct, that there was a need for a pretty dramatic wake-up call, a raising of the alarm. And that is what Extinction Rebellion delivered. If you are in Extinction Rebellion, you can't avoid being involved in disruptive action. And such action was really very successful, I think, in April of 2019, in forcing a national and indeed, as you say, international conversation.
Rupert, however, has since come to the conclusion that the moment for such tactics is now behind us.
What I then started to think over the next year is you can't just carry on doing the same thing once you've made your point. And I started to come to the view that some of the disruption of the public that Extinction Rebellion were doing, a notable example would be the so-called tube action at Canning Town, when rebels stopped tube trains from running, and nobody understood that action. It didn't make sense to anybody. That if you're disrupting the public and that goes on and on, then sooner or later you're just going to piss people off.
It is worth saying that the Just Stop Oil activists that I spoke with were viscerally aware of this risk.
I always say I would feel like that. You know, I do understand how you feel. It's not that we're doing this against you. We are not trying to upset ordinary members of the public. It's just that there is no other way to get attention from the media. And if you don't get attention from the media, nobody hears the message.
It is horrible that the only way that working class people can make political change is by harming or do you know what I mean? Disrupting working class people. It's horrible. That's the way they've set it up. They've done it on purpose. Divide and conquer, right? So yeah, no, it is hard. It is something that you do have to grapple with.
Rupert, however, was keen to suggest that our greatest asset in trying to bring about more meaningful action on climate change is the massive number of people who already agree that more needs to be done, and who activists need to be careful not to push away.
There is already a majority who appreciate that we're in trouble. There is already a climate majority, but that majority needs to be deepened as well as activated. What I've come to believe, and part of the reason why I moved on from XR in 2020, is that disrupting the public is something which has a sell-by date, and that we are past that sell-by date.
Rupert's organisation, the Climate Majority Project, seeks to foster a more open and inclusive climate movement. He wants to shake off perceptions of climate action and advocacy as being the preserve of radicals and revolutionaries, and empower everyone to get involved in whatever way they can.
Most people are never going to become activists as such, let alone parts of the radical flank of the environmental movement. So one of the things that the Climate Majority Project is for is to be there for everyone who is concerned but is not going to be gluing themselves to anything or what have you. Yeah. And what do such people do? What should such people do? Because it's going to be different for everyone, of course, right? For some people, it's going to be about getting involved in their local community in a serious way to build resilience. For other people, it'll be doing something similar, but in their workplace or in their business or in their profession or in their church. The point is, we believe that everybody has a power, potentially along with others, a superpower to act on this crisis.
Just Stop Oil, for their part, don't necessarily view this as an either-or scenario. Rightly or wrongly, they believe that their more controversial actions can still serve to bring people into the fold.
By far and away, your biggest cohort of people are people who really don't agree with the tactics of, say, Just Stop Oil, but they may well agree with the cause in some way. They might be slightly concerned about climate, for instance. Now, crucially, the research shows that these people tend to disassociate their negative feelings towards the likes of Just Stop Oil from the issue itself, right? So it might be that, they think that Just Stop Oil are a bunch of arseholes, but they may well be like, oh, well, I'm engaging more with the climate as a result of this activity. Given enough time, the anger subsides, right? But the awareness of the issue stays there.
Where everyone falls on how productive or successful JSO's actions are in this regard, however, it would be facile to paint the group's activities as flippant. Because undertaking stunts like this certainly has its consequences. After the spectacle of the Magna Carta action itself, everything quickly slowed down again in the Treasures of the British Library exhibit. The security team had closed off the side room in which Sue and Judy were sat, but plenty of people remained gathered around the entrance to it. I think everyone knew what we were waiting for: the police. One of the reasons Just Stop Oil activists glue themselves on after performing a stunt like this is they want to get arrested. As I mentioned, the theory goes that getting arrested serves to waste police time, and by clogging up the justice system, to place further pressure on the government. I'd half expected sirens to start blaring the moment the hammer and chisel came out of Sue and Judy's bags. But maybe I've seen too many action films. The reality was a painfully long wait in which everyone from visitors to staff to security were kind of just milling around, waiting for the upcoming spectacle of the activists being handcuffed and escorted away. I was once again perusing the display of extinct birds when the police made their way in. And there was a lot of police. In some respects, it seemed kind of silly that so many officers had been dispatched just to apprehend two kindly older women, one of whom is an ordained priest. But I assume it was a safety thing. After all, they'd made a pretty big impression on the glass casing. At a time in which British police forces are massively overstretched, however, one also had to wonder whether it wasn't partly a show of force. As we'll see, the police and courts have been engaged in a pretty unrelenting crackdown on Just Stop Oil's actions over the previous couple of years. Ensuring the arrest protest is at least a little bit intimidating is perhaps an attempt to deter activists from re-offending. It was with all of this in mind that I began to rethink my own presence in the library. During the lull in activity, I'd overheard the security team discussing a suspicion that there might be other activists hidden among the onlookers. I'd been pretty brazen in my attempts to get a good shot of the stunt, and once again found myself worried about getting caught up in having to try and talk myself out of a slightly sticky situation. Then, just as I was thinking I might head outside to wait for Sue and Judy to be taken to the police van, I overheard two security guards discussing the fact that there had been a handful of people filming. I even saw one going up to talk to a completely innocent bystander who happened to be wearing similar clothes to me.
Okay, I see. Which one is the other one?
Deciding that was my cue to leave, I began to head fairly swiftly towards the door. I paced through the exhibit, back into the atrium, and reached the top of the stairs, and then I heard someone shouting at me from behind.
Yeah?
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Were you filming the protesters?
I did, yeah, I happened to be in there.
What's the purpose, really?
Pardon?
Why were you filming them? What's this?
I was just interested, I was in there and...
You know how it is, really, to be honest with you. Things like that shouldn't happen because people get posted online, and we don't want that.
Okay, fair enough, sorry, I don't know.
We don't mind deleting it if you don't mind.
I won't do that, I'm afraid.
Are you a reader here or what? Are you a reader?
I'm not a reader here.
You're not a reader?
I just came to see the
And then, so are you making your way out, or what is it?
I'll leave if you would like me to leave.
Please do.
Okay, thank you. Have a nice day.
I want to hold my hands up here and admit that this wasn't exactly best practice. Given the opportunity, I totally should have explained clearly and honestly to the security guard why I was present. I'll aim to do better next time. My best excuse is simply that the adrenaline got the better of me and I wanted to be out of there. If the guard in question is watching, I'm very, very sorry. My nerves now sky high from my contentious, if very polite, exchange with the security guard. I walked out of the door where I planned to wait for Sue and Judy to be brought out. I was particularly interested in trying to get a sense of what their experience of being arrested was like. Because, as I've mentioned, Just Stop Oil's attempts to piss off the government have led to a massive shift in how protests like this are policed. Getting arrested has always been a central part of Just Stop Oil's activism. To some extent, activists welcome it. Taking up space in custody cells and using up police time as they fill out paperwork and decide charges is viewed as a further way in which the group can cause headaches for the government.
Exact figures for how many people have been arrested for taking part in Just Stop Oil actions are hard to come by. But those I did find helped to show both the scale of the group's numbers and the level of disruption they've managed to cause.
As of May 2023, Just Stop Oil themselves claimed that there had been 2,100 arrests carried out on members of the group. Limited figures released by the Metropolitan Police suggest that this is entirely possible. In 2022, they reported having carried out 902 arrests at JSO demonstrations over the previous 12 months. Last December, a full 630 were detained in just 30 days.
For activists, getting arrested has kind of just become a way of life.
We all understand the risk of what we're doing. We all take the action that we do knowing that this is a potential consequence, and as I've outlined, this is kind of civil resistance 101.
So, you usually take to the police station, you stay there for a few hours, you're interviewed, or the routine's always the same.
By and large, it's a lot of waiting around and it's tedious, and the police let you out at 3 o'clock in the morning, which is really unpleasant.
Every police officer has been nice to me, but that doesn't mean I approve of what they're doing.
When usually not treated badly by the police, but usually treated very well, and of course, if you're old, you're treated better, really. That's my experience anyway.
I've had many good chats with police officers in police cars being taken to the station. And we talk about, well, you've got grandchildren too. What do you think about their future?
I talk to people a lot, so I can't help but talk to the police officers, get their insight on it. One police officer told me that he used to be a climate scientist. I was like, what are you doing here? I was like, quit immediately, go back to what you was doing.
And then you get put in a cell, and I do my qigong or yoga and meditate, read a book, if you're allowed to keep a book, and mostly you are.
And then you're so worn out by the time you get into your cell, you thankfully go to sleep for some hours.
The food is awful, really awful, but hopefully it's not for long.
As we've been making this video, this shroud of arrests, court cases and convictions has been a constant presence.
Folks I've spoken to have constantly been mentioning court cases they're currently facing, as well as those of friends who are about to stand trial. While there might still be the occasional bit of friendly chit-chat between police officers and protesters as the latter are carted off to the cells, however, the overall approach taken by the police has changed dramatically over the past couple of years. Two bits of legislation have ignited this shift: the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act 2022 and the Public Order Act 2023. Both were drafted as a direct response to disruptive protests by Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain and Just Stop Oil, and both are uncompromising in the new powers they give to police.
The main impact has been to drastically lower the bar on what someone can be arrested for.
In response to JSO roadblockings, they specifically aim to criminalise protests which lead to what the bills call serious disruption. The twist is that what counts as serious is pretty broad. Pre-existing laws around blocking public highways have been expanded to criminalise any action which prevents or hinders any kind of day-to-day activity, such as car journeys and package deliveries. The new laws also make it an explicit offence to lock on by chaining or gluing oneself to other people, buildings or land. This is a tactic which has been used by activists for decades, including by the suffragettes, but which has come under increased scrutiny through its use by JSO. More troubling than this, however, is that the new law gives the police the power to arrest and prosecute someone simply for being in possession of equipment which could be used for locking on. The punishment? An unlimited fine. On top of all of this, the bill's massively expanded the police's ability to stop and search people. Officers are now able to stop and search anyone in the vicinity of a protest, or even in the vicinity of a place where an officer thinks a protest might possibly take place, even if they don't have any reasonable suspicion that that person might be involved.
Whatever one's thoughts on Just Stop Oil themselves, it soon became clear that the police would use these new laws to punish even the most mild-mannered of activists.
During the coronation of the new King Charles in May 2023, 6 anti-monarchy protesters, who had been intending to hold placards by the side of the procession to Westminster Abbey, were arrested whilst unloading their van. The reason given was that the luggage straps they were using to secure their placards could potentially have been used for locking on. Both bits of legislation have thus been deeply controversial. Amnesty International described the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act as deeply authoritarian. The United Nations Special Rapporteur for Environmental Defenders simply wrote that protests which aim to express dissent and to draw attention to a particular issue are by their nature disruptive, and criticised the UK government for adopting increasingly severe and draconian measures against environmental defenders. This, he concluded, has a significant chilling effect on civil society and the exercise of fundamental freedoms.
James went even further in his analysis, pointing to the role the oil lobby had played in facilitating these new laws.
I think it's very revealing, to be honest, because, I mean, if we look at the Public Order Act, for instance, the Public Order Act was drafted by the Policy Exchange, right? The Policy Exchange was funded by ExxonMobil, at least in part. So essentially we have a situation where we've got oil companies drafting the laws that are being used to take away our rights.
As the police have become ever more liberal with who they arrest, the court system has begun handing out ever more severe punishments. In 2023, Morgan Trowland and Marcus Decker were handed prison sentences of 3 years and 2 years 7 months respectively for hoisting a Just Stop Oil banner above a bridge over the River Thames. Trowland did receive a 25% reduction in his sentence for having a conscientious motive for occupying the bridge. Nevertheless, this marks the longest sentence ever given to a non-violent protester in the UK. That was until a couple of months ago. This July, as we were working on this video, 5 Just Stop Oil activists were jailed for between 4 and 5 years each for planning to block the M25 motorway which surrounds London. JSO co-founder Roger Hallam was among them. The group were found guilty of the brand new crime of conspiracy to commit a public nuisance. In short, they were imprisoned as much for their role in organising the roadblock as for any actions on the day.
At the very least, the fact that people continue to sign up to take part in Just Stop Oil actions speaks to a certain level of conviction about the seriousness of the climate crisis and a willingness to suffer a loss of liberty in order to bring about greater action upon it.
I had fully planned on sticking around to see Sue and Judy being escorted from the building. The police van outside was clearly waiting to take them off to the station, and there was even a press photographer waiting to try and get some snaps. Nevertheless, the morning had kind of been a lot. After my tense moment with the security guard, I really just wanted to be as far away from the British Library as possible. Apologies for not quite having the nerve to see it through. As I went back to hide in my hotel room, however, Sue and Judy were eventually led out of the British Library and into the back of the waiting police van. From there, they were taken to Bromley Police Station, which is not, it's worth saying, the library's closest station at all. I'd already been told that this was a pretty standard indignity the Metropolitan Police like to inflict on activists. Taking them to a station some distance away from where they were arrested serves to just make their arrest experience that tiny bit more difficult. The hope is, presumably, that this will make them think twice about undertaking disruptive action in the future. The police also came good on what I'd been told was another standard practice: holding activists in cells until late, thereby making it difficult for them to get home. Sue and Judy had been arrested by around 12 noon, but they weren't set free until gone dark. While they were waiting, however, their stunt had begun to make headlines. I had wondered in the lead up to the day whether the media appetite for stories about Just Stop Oil actions might be starting to wane. Does there come a point when these actions simply become so regular that they stop being newsworthy? If I ever thought they would, I was wrong. As you saw at the very beginning of this video, the story instantly began to be picked up by broadcasters and spread like wildfire across social media. Coverage didn't even stop at the UK border. Outlets from America, Germany, and around the world shared footage of the stunt. The reaction was, to put it lightly, mixed. Twitter in particular was awash with right-wingers hurling all kinds of abuse at Sue, Judy, and Just Stop Oil more broadly. But in my chat with James, he'd mentioned his notion, which is borne out by the academic literature, that this immediate controversy would soon pass, to be replaced by more positive outcomes. In fact, alongside trying to give an insight into how Just Stop Oil pull off their actions, the key question I wanted to try and answer with this video is, does the disruptive form of non-violent protest, which is their modus operandi, work? We've already heard some differing thoughts on that in the abstract.
But it would be silly to have that conversation without at least acknowledging that JSO's core demand has, at least in principle, been met.
On the 4th of July 2024, the UK got a new government, and the incoming Labour administration have promised to join Denmark, France and Ireland in imposing a ban on the issuing of new licences for the drilling of oil and gas. Of course, how much of that decision can be attributed directly to Just Stop Oil is perhaps up for debate. We've certainly seen that British politicians have, at least in public, been totally disparaging of the group's tactics. Net Zero Secretary Ed Miliband recently described their approach as disastrous in terms of persuading people to come to our cause. Nevertheless, it would be almost ludicrous to suggest that it wasn't at least a factor.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, James was keen to argue that Just Stop Oil had been a central part of setting the agenda here.
So one thing that we notice is that even when we're not taking action now, when oil and gas is spoken about, oftentimes you'll hear TV presenters using our talking points because basically we've been hammering a message again and again and again.
Examples of similar groups taking action in other countries only further suggests that direct action can, at least sometimes, get the goods. A Swedish sister group of JSO called Restore Wetlands recently declared victory on its demands that the government protect the country's endangered wetlands after a 2-year campaign of gluing themselves to highways. In 2023, the Netherlands chapter of Extinction Rebellion similarly managed to force the government to launch an inquiry into fossil fuel subsidies. Back in the UK, JSO activists remained disappointed that the incoming Labour government had stopped short of revoking the hundreds of new oil and gas licences which were issued in the final year of the outgoing Tory government.
It's a weird one, really, because the week that happened, we were like, oh, we've won. But beyond that, there was no kind of sense of wanting to celebrate, really, because like we know, and the science tells us that realistically this isn't enough. And the fact is that Labour haven't committed to ending all the oil and gas licences that were greenlit by the Tories since 2021.
Along with allied organisations in other countries, they've also since expanded their demand.
Now, that's a great first step, but obviously, you know, the scientific community will tell us that isn't anywhere near what we need to be. You know, that isn't commensurate with the scale of the crisis, right? And so what we need is an international legally binding treaty to end the extraction and burning of oil, gas and coal.
While there was an unignorable sense that things had shifted among everyone I spoke to, they also didn't seem entirely undeterred by new arrest powers. As we were putting the final touches to this video, the group were beginning a wave of actions which they hoped would lead to the temporary closure of British airports. The preemptive arrest of 10 activists accused of organising that disruption might have taken the wind out of the sails of that plan a little bit, but at least one airport lounge had been sprayed with orange paint by the time I finished writing this piece.
Perhaps this will be a final hurrah for the group, or maybe it will mark a further escalation of their interventions.
One thing is clear. The havoc which scientists warn we're wreaking on our planet's ecosystem is presently continuing unabated, and the crisis this will engender will lead to levels of disruption which will make that caused by Just Stop Oil look minuscule.
Even if either police intervention or public opinion does bring a halt to JSO's actions, that threat is not going away. There's something Sue said in my interview with her which has stuck with me in the months since.
I mean, we've lived at the very best of times because of fossil fuels in many ways. We have been part of the generation that has most benefited from fossil fuels. So I feel I need to make reparation for that in some way.
It's a sentiment I hear often from older folks who are active on climate issues. A sense of embarrassment or guilt that their peers didn't do more to ameliorate the effects of the climate crisis earlier. There's no getting away from it. The climate crisis is a generational issue. The perks of burning fossil fuels have largely been felt by older generations and those who have passed, while the consequences will be borne by younger generations and those who are yet to come.
The climate crisis is just one of a number of issues which have come to define a vicious generation war which sometimes seems to have taken over our politics.
There's an abiding sense among many younger people that the world our parents have left us isn't quite what it was. Whether the issue is housing, jobs, pensions, or tuition fees, every aspect of our lives seems to be so much harder and more precarious than it might have been 40 or 50 years ago. To make matters worse, the past decade has seen a media discourse emerge which paints millennials, Gen Xers, and Zoomers as lazy, entitled, and ungrateful. The bad news is that the worsening state of the climate and the persistence of those various economic issues means that these intergenerational tensions are unlikely to go away anytime soon.
The good news, maybe, is that I'm making a film about them.
My feature-length Nebula original documentary, Boomers, is currently in production, in an attempt to understand why age today often seems to equal wealth and power. Last month, I headed over to the US to do a bunch of filming, talking to both experts and ordinary folks about intergenerational inequality. As this video goes out, I'll be travelling around France and the UK talking to more people.
Boomers is by far the biggest thing I've ever made. It's got a proper budget and has given me the opportunity to work with a whole team of talented creatives and artists.
There have been shooting days where we've had 7 people on location with us, all doing different jobs, which is such a massive step up from my usual homespun operation, it's unbelievable. All of that is made possible because Boomers is a Nebula original production. By now, you've almost certainly heard me talk about Nebula before. It's a premium, creator-owned streaming service on which you can watch all of my normal videos ad-free, along with bonus content and a rapidly expanding catalogue of original shows and films too. Recent months have seen the release of The Getaway, the new game show from the team behind Wendover Productions and Jetlag the Game. The Getaway involves 6 creators competing with one another in a secret Hitler-like game of deception, with an absolutely glorious twist. I'm obsessed with the show already and cannot recommend it enough. We've also recently dropped Jesse Gender's sci-fi short Identities and are ramping up to release Abby from Philosophy Tube's short film Dracula's Ex-Girlfriend. All of these shows and films are exclusive to Nebula.
There's never been a better time to get on board with Nebula, and you can get a cheeky little discount in doing so if you sign up by following my link go.nebula.tv/Tom Nicholas.
This gets you 40% off an annual subscription and turns it into an absolute steal compared to most streaming services these days. If you don't want to add another subscription to your monthly budget, we also recently began offering lifetime subscriptions, which have proven extremely popular. These naturally cost more up front, but guarantee you uninterrupted access to Nebula for as long as both you and it exist. These lifetime subscriptions are also helping us to put together a pot of cash which can be used to fund more and better original productions like Boomers, without having to rely on venture capital investment or anyone else who might tell us what to do.
I'm really keen for Boomers to be the first of many big documentary projects that I'm able to make, and signing up for Nebula using my link really does help to make that happen. It shows that people are interested in watching the stuff that I put out, and therefore makes it much easier for me to convince the team to throw more time, money and resources my way for other cool projects in the future.
That link again is go.nebula.tv/Tom Nicholas. I'll look forward to seeing you over on Nebula, and we'll share more updates on how Boomers is coming together very, very soon. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you found it interesting or enjoyable in some way. All that's left for me to do is to thank my top tier Patreon supporters, who are Agent Maxwell, Alexander Blank, Alan Gann, Amit Singh Parahar, Bill Mitchell, Christopher Cowan, Dickon Spain, Fiasco Linguini, Gabriel Koch, Gary, Glenn Sugden, Jarabar, Jimmy Dunn, Lisa Yuan, Neil de Bildgaard, Richard Rapoon, Sergio Suarez, Sophia R, Strange Weekend, Yillam Sen, ZC Reese, and Zoe Alden. If you'd like to join those supporters in getting early access to little bits of video as we're making them, copies of the scripts to the videos, little updates on what I'm working on, and behind the scenes stuff, then you can do so by heading over to patreon.com/Tom Nicholas. Thank you so much for watching once again, and I will look forward to seeing you in the next video.